Hi, Emily. Thank you so much for sending this. I'm like really excited. I think you've done a lot of really good work here. What I want to do in my comments, so as anticipated, I have a lot to say and a lot of feedback. And what I want to do is first talk about the framework here with activity theory and social accountability, which I love. I think social accountability is kind of the key concept that we want, and I love uh, titling the chapter this. That's perfect. Uh, but I'm not sold on activity theory, and I want to go through why, and then I want to calibrate how these chapters should look based on the two books that are basically already written, the writing about data and then team writing. So for this framework, I like how you kind of divided it into these two sort of layers based on how activity theory involved. And the first is kind of the basics. So we have who's doing the proposal, their solution, and then the outcome. But you don't really use the tools much when you get to your analysis towards the end. So when you get to this part here, which I think is really key, and I really like this, it's almost an activity, and I want to talk about that, making this into an activity, a learning by doing type thing. But you've dropped tools out of here. Who are the subjects, the objects, the desired outcomes? And that, I think the reason that you're doing that is because it's not that relevant. The tools that's really relevant to us and as theorists and the way that activity theory was incorporated into writing studies, where we're thinking about genres as tools, or we're thinking about different technologies. But in the case of the proposal, the tool's always going to be writing a proposal. So that isn't working. And that was actually why, because I started with activity theory, and then I felt like, that's not really that useful. So what I see as kind of the basics here are, so what if instead of going with that complex mess of triangles, we divide things, and I'm not sold on this particular terminology, but we think about having it at the idea level, which students for the most part get. This is fairly intuitive. I'm not sure how important it is to emphasize this because it's so intuitive, though maybe it is. So we have the agent and we have the sender and receiver of a proposal, and students generally get like it's to a particular person, to a particular agency. The idea or the solution maybe, and then that it's solving a problem. And then at the second level, we have so I went through what you had in terms of the questions you were asking. And so I'm extrapolating here. You see rules or norms, but maybe it's constraints, because you also want to put in under here, past actions, what else has been proposed. And maybe it's just constraints because all of these are constraints. Then you have stakeholders, and maybe stakeholders and interests, and then divisions of labor, something about the power channels. So what I have here is constraints, stakeholders and interests, and power channels. And I think it's really useful to divide it up this way and to think about, okay, you're going to start off, you have these things here. Now let's talk about these other things and really try to troubleshoot it and think about the social accountability. So I think that the two-level embedded triangle is just too messy and it doesn't stick in memory. And then plus, to get the activity theory terminology to a student level, we have to translate it. I think it's just too much and it just doesn't stick enough. And so we want something that students should be able to remember. So here, it's like you need a good idea, but you also need to be socially accountable. You need to integrate at the social or organizational level. And in order to do that, you need to think of these three things. So that's my comments on the framework there. Now, my second set of comments here is thinking about how these chapters should go. And so you kind of work through some of this. Let me bring up the writing about data and show you how that is organized. So what I'm trying to do is title the chapter with a lesson. So that's why I liked your title, Proposals Need to be Socially Accountable, or something that really kind of sticks. So that if you're just reviewing the table of contents, somebody's actually maybe learning something, extracting some principles. Begins with a dramatic story, and the team writing also begins, each chapter begins with some kind of dialogue from students or a scenario from a team to make things really visual. And you'll see that very quickly we get to an exercise here. So I have these 4 discussion exercises. Look at this memo. What's going well? What's not going well? In here. Then I have another principle in the next section and another set of principles, and then we get to another 4 discussion activity, and keeping it really quickly, lots of activities embedded throughout the chapters. And yeah, I think this one just has the 2. And we're ending each chapter with a summary. So the way you begin it with what this chapter is about, I think that's a good idea. But I think I would like to keep these kinds of things for the end, for the summary, rather than front loading it. Let's really try to engage students into the chapter with the case study. So what I'm thinking is maybe begin with the case study of the painted dog exhibit, and then move to introducing these two kind of levels. So first, if we look at the proposals that were submitted, and the case study that I start off with probably needs some work, or we need to imagine what the staff or volunteers might have proposed. But this is pretty easy, and you could use that kind of terminology that you have, those examples that you have at the end to show, hey, this is a really good problem, but where this idea failed is with the power channels. Then maybe give a second case study, and then have a 4 discussion thing about why, and ask students to analyze it. It's possible, maybe even with the painted dog exhibit, to first have students analyze it through this level. I'm not quite sure. If we want to, maybe we want to walk through one first and then give students a second one. For the second one, I am thinking that, and I'll send you the link to this. This is a New York Times article called "Who's Afraid of the Big Bad Wolf Scientist?" It is a fascinating article. I love this. So even if we don't use it for the book, I think you'll like it. And this will kind of capture your attention. He was this preeminent researcher on wolves at Washington State, and but he got very unpopular, and he basically his lab is shuttered now because he didn't pay attention to the politics. And so I think we could write up this case study in a way that really draws attention to, wow, he did not do a good job appealing to the different stakeholders and interests. So it's really pretty fascinating. And I like what this does is it also brings in the idea of a research proposal up early. So I'm thinking something that would look like this: the painted dogs case. Then we introduce our framework. So up here at the ID level, social organizational level, really kind of explaining that this is where we see most students and kind of fall short, and that this is a major difference between immature and more mature writing. Kind of use it to sell, like, hey, we're expecting more of you now at this level. You need to start thinking as part of an organization. So then we can do the analysis of this one. The painted dog exhibit, I think, is really easy to understand. Then describe the wolf scientists as students to apply the framework. I like those sort of sentence starters that you had. And then when you talk about the different types of proposals, research proposals or whatever, let's emphasize this framework so that we really put our money into the framework being what students remember. And if they don't understand the different types of proposals, that's fine. But what we really want to get at is understanding this framework, and then maybe ending the chapter with giving them some examples of things that they might analyze as a class activity. What would be the constraints? Who would be the stakeholders and interests? And if we could do some more university-focused examples. So, for instance, I like how you've done this. And if we could think of any kind of chart or form for students to fill out, that might be useful. Here's an example of one that would be more of a university focus. Somebody's proposing an art installation. What problem is it trying to solve? To examine the effects of climate change, for instance. But we're thinking of a few more local ones. In addition to, these are appropriate for a professional communication context, but we don't want to get too alienating for students. And then one last thing in terms of calibration. So if we look up here where you have these different types of proposal, this is just too much text. They aren't going to read it. So we need to find a way to break it down. They might not read a table, but they'll be more likely to skim it. Or again, if we can get them doing some kind of activity, that would be useful. Or it might be, if it's possible to think of, to give them an activity, give them some different context to analyze, to think about, and then say, hey, what you just did are 5 basic types of proposals. The first one is a research proposal, the next one is a client proposal, so on and so forth. Yeah, so what I would like you to do is let me know if you would like to take another stab at it. I think that's what I would prefer, but if you feel like, that's too overwhelming and stuff, I can go ahead and take over from here. So, but I think this is a really great start. I'm really glad you sent me something very rough so that I can give you lots of feedback, lots of redirection here. hope that you're enjoying your time in California. And I look forward to seeing you soon.